we're filming this on Thursday. Where do things stand right now?
Kind of like it's being presented as a pivotal day, as yesterday was, which was Wednesday. But we're sort of at the point where folks are feeling some pressure to produce legislative text from this framework and have it ready to go by early next week. And in Congress, a lot of the times these big votes are wedged up against these recesses. The members really want to go home, and you don't want to let things, if they're controversial, hang out over the recess. And so we have a 2-week recess coming up for the July 4th holiday. And there's just an immense feeling that you got to get this thing passed through the Senate before leaving town and going back home.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing from my sources on the Hill as well, that they really have an aggressive timetable for this. They want votes to happen before that recess, and that means they got to get text together, real fast. Whether it's, I think this week, this Friday, tomorrow would be pretty ambitious from everything I've heard, but maybe next Friday.
Yeah, and keep in mind when there's a 2-week recess and one of the weeks is well before July 4th, I think there's a little bit of wiggle room on the schedule once it gets on the floor. But you're not going to hear the leaders talking about that until it's really, that's a threat you bring out at the last minute to say, all right, seriously, for real, like, we're doing this, you're going to stay here until we're done. And we're not quite there yet because they're not done. And I'd say like the closest, if you're looking for like an analog, would be this infrastructure deal from last year, where you have a framework and then the challenge is turning it into text. And that took much longer than what the gun negotiators are trying to do right now. It's about like half the timetable. That the infrastructure deal took about 6 weeks to turn into text. So that was pretty painful. And so it's interesting how much more quickly this one's moving. And I think it's because of the sort of polarizing nature of guns compared to bridges, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think the calculation is that if it waits too long, there's going to be something that comes up to disrupt the whole thing, whether it's in the deal itself or outside of the deal. Last time they had talks like this, it was 2018, right? You had President Trump at the time expressing interest in passing some sort of gun bill even with red flag laws and so forth. And there were a lot of talks about that. It never got as far as this has gotten, but that was actually derailed by the first impeachment trial.
Correct.
And so other things besides what's in this deal can actually derail these sorts of talks, right?
Yeah, and you have probably more insight on what's going on in the Supreme Court than I do, but there's a firearm decision pending there, which I could see changing the political environment on this issue. And then you also have the abortion decision, which is still not been released. So either of those things, the guns was more directly related. Abortion really has nothing to do with this bill, but Congress can get distracted so easily and things could get more partisan on a daily basis. And so there's really, if you really want to get this done, there's no sense in letting it just sort of play out. And, I think the other piece of urgency here to keep in mind is that there's still this reconciliation discussion happening on the Hill, which is this big party line bill Democrats want to do. And they're just straight up running out of time to do it. So the longer guns takes, if that were to go into July, it could erase that from ever happening. And so I think there's a sense that you got to get the guns deal done to see if there's anything else Democrats can do. They don't have many days left in the majority before November, if you look at the calendar. That's
actually one of the things that makes this whole deal particularly interesting, that Republicans are on board with doing it. But again, there's another factor, too, that just came up that probably not a lot of people on the Hill have even heard of yet. But apparently yesterday, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is the gun industry's trade group, reported, one of their top executives reported that the DOD is considering cutting off supply of a certain kind of 5.56 round that's commonly used in AR-15. It's called a green tip, and it's estimated to be about 30% of the supply out there is green tip. And so the Obama administration had tried to do this through rulemaking a few years back, and failed after a huge outcry against it. So if the Biden administration is moving forward with some other way of trying to cut off the supply of this ammunition to civilian markets, that could certainly cause enough of a sideshow blow up that it could undo this deal, I would think, in potential.
Yeah, and then the question might be for something like that, or even on the more progressive side of things like assault weapons ban or things like that. The question is, once it's on the floor, are there going to be amendment votes on these things?
Mm-hmm.
And my sense right now, unrelated votes, but still within the gun category. And
Mm-hmm.
and my sense right now is they don't want to have amendment votes on it. But let's say somebody didn't like that rulemaking. Well, you could have an amendment related to it if you wanted to, and
Right.
maybe people don't want to take that. So even once they get text, then there's this like next level of, well, how does this actually go through the Senate? I mean, you can say no amendments. We're just going to move it through and block everything. That's the most efficient way to do it. But people may complain and say, I actually want the vote on this amendment. It could be someone within the group. So we're still multi steps away from this passing the Senate, and then it has to pass the House. So
Right.
you're hearing a lot about how the framework's done, and that's the biggest part. I agree with that, honestly. When you have 20 people supporting it publicly, that's a huge breakthrough, right? But still kind of a lot of drama to get through, in my opinion.